So
I mean, it was super cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, it was economical. I mean, they couldn't believe that some people, some young newlyweds, were asking to stay in the cemetery in the guest room in the attic, and so I think it was like £5 a night or something like
Yeah.
that. And so, like, are you sure you want to do this? And we're like,
Holy cow.
it's an Adventist historic site, and
Michael,
But now, yeah, I understand it's been converted into upscale
Michael,
apartments
this
now.
is how every horror movie starts. Like two young people, they go to Europe. They're like, we want to stay here near the cemetery. And they're like, are you sure? Oh, yeah, it's super cheap. Okay. Kick us off, Michael.
All right, let's do it. 3. Welcome to the Adventist Pilgrimage Podcast with your host, Michael Campbell. Greg is MIA, but he'll be joining us hopefully soon. And I have Matthew Lucio from their Adventist History Podcast Network. And I'm excited today because we have a special guest, Matthew.
Who do we have here? She looks vaguely familiar.
Vaguely familiar. I tell you, I can't imagine, but I think someone very special and is an incredible historian and has something very special we're going to find out that is about to be released this month with Women's History Month, and that is none other than Heidi Olson Campbell.
Oh, it's your wife. Fantastic.
Absolutely. And so I just am so excited because she is a passionate historian, a very good thinker. And of course, I'm not biased at all, and she's also in the middle of finishing up a PhD in early modern history. Welcome, Heidi. Tell us what early modern history is, because some people have no idea.
Well, and it's a debated term, like all terms in history, right? Because there's is there a clear delineation between late medieval, early modern? Because of course, people didn't wake up one day and say, okay, now it's the modern period. But it's the period of time around 1500 to about 1800 is generally considered the early modern period, though I delve all the way into late medieval. So it's a slippery area between the two periods of time. So, but as we start developing into a lot of the structures and ideas of that developed the modern period right now.
So basically when Martin Luther was born, it became the modern era.
Yes, of course, that's how it works.
Yeah.
No.
Well done, Martin.
But yes. Well, it was a little bit after actually Martin Luther was born. And Martin Luther is definitely like a product of the late medieval period in many ways, but probably a better starting point would be thinking more of like the discovery of the continents of America, right? Because that's really what does a lot of impact in changing the view of the world.
See, that makes a lot of sense, but you're ruining my clear delineation. Like you could say the modern era began with Martin Luther. Maybe the postmodern era coincides with Martin Luther King.
Okay, I
like
could see
1960s. Anyways, I'm just saying it makes for kind of a popular categorization. May not be strictly factual, but I'm a podcaster, so when does it ever stop me?
It's a way of thinking about the parameters, anyways. But yeah.
Yes.
Reminds me of George Knight. He used to always talk about KISS, keep it simple. And then there was the extra S that he kind of hesitated, and then he'd say stupid.
Yes. Keep it simple.
I'm sure he wasn't looking at me, but anyway.
Well, Heidi, I am very happy to have you on board here. Now, we usually, I say we, this isn't my podcast, but I'm not used to seeing a lot of early modern historians on Adventist Pilgrimage. So you must be doing something in relation to Adventist history.
Well, as with many historians that are also Seventh-day Adventists, we like to dip our feet into the Adventist history as well and are interested in it. And really my interest in Adventist history is part of what inspired me to go into studying history to begin with. And then as well, obviously, I took classes in a variety of different areas and periods of time. And so amongst those, I have done some stuff on modern Chinese history. And because of that, I did some research on Adventist missionary women and Bible workers, Chinese Bible workers, which were predominantly women. And so that has led into my interest in doing stuff on Adventist women.
And didn't they have like a term for that, like Bible women and stuff?
Yeah. Bible women were often what they were. That was not an Adventist term or a uniquely Adventist term, as much as we'd like to claim it, maybe. But Bible women actually predate Adventist involvement in missions. Other groups also used women in India and China, particularly, to go and minister to other women because they recognized that a lot of those cultures were not really accepting of men going in and ministering to women at home.
Ah, interesting. Okay, that makes sense. I see how you've gotten your foot in the door here with Adventist history, and but you're also doing a podcast. Is it about these Bible women, or is it about something else?
Well, it started out because of the interest in Bible women. Unfortunately, I don't speak Chinese, so I have to use English resources. And because of that, I have started looking into a lot of stories of Adventist women missionaries, particularly. But the podcast is not just about Adventist women missionaries. It's called They Also Served. And it's looking at the roles that women played and the many, many roles that women played in Adventist history and in the development and creation of the church that we know today.
So drum roll, They Also Served,
Yes.
new Adventist history podcast. This is amazing. Wait a minute. Where did that title come from?
It's a great question because I actually have the book with me. Not that, I mean, it's a podcast. So
No,
really
we have video too.
All right, I will hold it up and show it to
there
you
we
guys.
Go.
It's a book by a woman named Ava Covington. Covington is her unmarried name, and I actually did a lot of research to find out who Ava Covington was because, as far as I knew, nobody had done research on her. But anyways, They Also Served is a book by a woman in the early half of the 20th century who wrote in her introduction that she was writing the book because the stories of women were being lost and that people didn't know the roles of women in the Adventist church. And so she was trying to record them before those women's stories got lost completely. She does mention Ellen White as one of the people, and one of her chapters is on Ellen White, but she also highlights other women and their many, many roles in the church, including people like Nellie Droulard, who was a big fundraiser, the first single woman who went as a missionary to Europe, and things like that. And I'm talking about Maud Cicely Boyd, not Jane Andrews' daughter.
Okay. Well, welcome to the Adventist History podcasting family. I know you're not part of the Adventist History Project. You're doing this through the Adventist Learning Community, right? But you're still part of our family. And Michael knows, Greg knows, I think, I have been wanting to get a female podcast host in the Adventist history realm for a long time. And I am very excited that you are the one who has stepped into this and hopefully only the first of many to come. But you are making history while reporting on history.
Yes, and that was one of the fun things about putting together podcast because one of the people we interviewed was Ella Simmons, who, as I say in my introduction of her, is actually like a fur. So she is history and is still alive. So that is kind of cool to be able to meet people who actually are making history themselves.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is a podcast. You're going to be telling Adventist women's stories. Ella is one of them. And what are some of the other people you're going to be talking about?
A group on the North American division that's really sponsoring it and looking at it. And it's North American based people mostly that I'm interviewing, but we are trying to highlight women from around the world a little bit, or at least mention their stories or how women were impacting other parts of the globe. So we will talk about Petra Thunheim. We're going to talk about who actually went from Europe all the way to Java and China. So she was very active all the way around the world. We'll be talking about Anna Knight, who was a missionary to India, amongst other things, and her story. So we're going to be trying to talk about, and we'll talk about some women in South America, Millerite women. Anyways, a lot of different women from different time periods who did things like editing and writing and education and medical work.
All right. But the question is, why? I mean, I would imagine most listeners or viewers are probably in the boat that they'd never heard of some of these people, maybe most of these people you've mentioned. And so why tell women's stories? Like, don't we have all these Adventist history books, and don't we basically understand Adventist history enough? Why do we need these other stories? What do they add to Adventist history? I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
No, absolutely. And that is a question. And that's kind of what we tackle in our first episode, is talking about why study women's history. And it is a great question, because people do say, we have history books already written. We know the basic course of history. So why do we need to know women's stories? Well, first of all, to loosely quote Mao Zedong, women hold up half the sky, is a famous quote. And when we tell half the story, when we just focus on men's stories, we're only telling half the story. We're missing out on how things shaped up. When we look at the Adventist Church, I believe recent statistics that came out from Adventist Archive Statistics and Research, 59% of the church they're approximating. I mean, the statistics are hard to come by exactly, are women.
Right.
So if we don't tell their stories or look at that 59%, we're getting a very incomplete picture of how the past of the church and even the future of the church. And when we don't represent both sides of the story or all sides of the story, we also are telling people that oftentimes it can end up omitting and making people feel like they're not as important to the role of the church and the formation of the church. So it actually impacts our future, has the potential to impact our future if we don't tell those stories. Because representation helps us see what we can become and why we need to participate in something.
It's crazy to me that 60% of the church can be female, and we know so few female stories in Adventist history. I mean, how alienating that must feel at times, to just be the majority, to be the ones who are holding up the local church as women often are, and then to hear stories of other people.
Yeah. So it's an important I think it's a huge gap, a huge missing piece of our story. We have a handful of women that we mention in Adventist history classes, like Ellen White predominantly, and sometimes Annie Smith, or boy, my brain is suddenly going blank. Oh, Rachel Oakes Preston.
Mm-hmm.
There's those handful of women, but there's so many more stories as will be revealed. And I especially find fascinating how many single women were really active as missionaries. And those stories are almost completely absent in our narrative.
And I think that's partly because if they were single, there was nobody to tell their story, right? Or, I mean, this is some of the reason why some of these stories haven't been told, right?
Well,
I mean, at least in part.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons these stories haven't been told. Partially because a lot of times those women are not in the top leadership positions, and we're really good at telling the top leadership positions because we've done a lot of institutional history, right? And so we're looking at the institution. So we look at the top people, the people who are really visible, very vocal. And so the stories of women tend to drop out in that, because women are often working behind the scenes, doing activities, and oftentimes they're not promoting themselves. So married women tend to promote their husbands' careers in what they were writing or saying. And so those stories often and usually often were what they would have even considered like a supporting role. And I may talk a little bit about Minnie Chrysler here and how she played a supporting role in promoting her husband's legacy, but not promoting her own. And then the single women, oftentimes, unless they wrote down their own story. Now we have a few exceptions, like Anna Knight, rather. She actually wrote her own like autobiography, and because she lived a really long time, that also helped retain her memory, because a lot of people really appreciated her services and like kept her story alive. But yes, for many single women, that meant when they died, if they didn't write down their story, that nobody kept telling their story and they disappeared.
Talk about disappearing stories. So Anna Knight, but you found a story connected to Anna Knight recently, right? Of a woman who kind of was disappeared.
Tell me about her. and I won't even remember her name right off the top of my head. I was just working on that last night, actually. Oh, Edith Embry. She wasn't a single woman, though. She did get married. But Edith Embry was the woman who actually helped convert her to Adventism. And I've seen her name mentioned in a lot of like biographies of Anne and Knight. But Edith Embry there's no more discussion of who she was or what she did after talking to Anne and Knight. And so I decided to do some digging last night to find out who she was. And Edith actually worked for Pacific Press and Signs of the Time, and did apparently do this a lot. She would communicate with people who would write in, send Bible studies out to them, and work with them anyways through the Bible studies to help convert them to Adventism. And later on, she gets married to a guy, and that's also one of the reasons that we lose a lot of the people's names or the women's identities or their roles. Like same thing with Ava Covington. I didn't know anybody who really knew who she was. Part of it is because when she was in her late 30s, early 40s, she got married to a guy named Wall and actually came to the DC area. Her husband worked for what is now Washington Adventist University and was essentially like the dean of the School of Arts and Sciences. And and she never had children of her own. So she raised her two stepchildren because he had been married before, but she had no kids of her own. And so her story has just kind of disappeared too. And Edith, anyways, gets married. She becomes a nurse. She works as a nurse, and she works as she's clearly still an active Bible worker and colporteur in her later years. But nobody's investigated her story.
Hold on. Did you guys go find her grave, though, if she was in the DC area?
Ava? Yes. No, she didn't actually get buried in the DC area. Because she ended up moving out after her husband
Just
retired.
saying, it sounds like a great, 20th, 25th, however long you guys have been married, anniversary idea.
Well, we did, what was it, a year ago when we were at PUC in California. We went around the graves in Healdsburg and looked for early missionaries. Some of the people that I will talk about in the podcast or have written.
All right. Well,
that was a great anniversary trip. What are you talking about?
You know what no one says? Nobody parties like an Adventist historian.
Yes, absolutely.
Those parties are on fire. Anyways,
just for anyone listening, it got started on our honeymoon. But anyways, we'll just leave it at that.
We all did dates at cemeteries.
This does not get better. The more you find out, friends, the more questions you have. That's all I'm going to say. Somebody needs to do an encyclopedia article on YouTube.
Have mercy. Have mercy. But it's not like we went to a retirement home or anything on our honeymoon,
Yeah.
Absolutely did. That is just astounding to me. But speaking of the encyclopedia, Heidi, you wrote some articles on Adventist women in the encyclopedia, right?
That's it.
Yes, on 4 women. Well, 4 women and a man. So one was a couple, one, and then 3 women. So they were all missionaries to China, and all of them were super exciting lives, at least to me, because most of them actually were there during World War II. Not the time that you want to be in China, by the way, just in case you were wondering.
Spoiler alert for those of you with the time machine.
That's right. Yeah, think concentration camp. Well, for some of them, they had to flee or they got captured.
Yes. Well, the one exception was Celia Bryans, who actually, her husband went and was a doctor in the United States, and they weren't there. She didn't get stuck in a concentration camp. But Olga O did. So should I tell Olga O's story?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Do it.
I know Michael loves John Oss because he was into publishing and traveled all the way to Inner Mongolia. So he was quite the traveler. And the interesting part is when you read these stories of men that were missionaries, you see all the places they went and stuff and all the positions that they held. But then you start wondering to yourself, there was a church in whatever town they were supposed to be centrally located in. And they often had some kind of position that they held. So what happened to that local church where they were? when they were off traveling to Inner Mongolia and Tibet and stuff like that. Well, my contention is that actually their wives held down the fort, basically, and often kind of held on to their positions, took over their positions while they were gone, just to try to keep things going. So Olga O has a great story, and she was a writer. Most of these women were writers, which is part of the reason that I was able to find their stories and uncover them. Olga O wrote a whole book on her experience in China, and she starts out by telling how she got really sick when she was she had just arrived. She actually had lost a child in the United States shortly before her husband was called as a missionary. And so she, like a 9-month-old, it was the only child they ever had. And so she really didn't want to go as a missionary to China, but her husband, John, was excited and said, let's go to China. So she went to China with him, and she was not happy. And then he left her to go traveling and do his work in a town. And she didn't speak Chinese at this point very well, knew a handful of words. She had a Chinese employee that was helping her out. And she had met the women at the church, and that was about it. And she was all by herself. And she gets really, really sick, passes out. The Chinese employee thinks she's dead and calls the embassy because they're like, oh no, we have a dead foreigner in their apartment. And the nice little the embassy sends off somebody to check on this foreign American woman. It's not even the American embassy that sends somebody to check on
which
her.
embassy is it?
Oh, yeah, I knew you'd ask that. I think it's like the German embassy or something.
What? Is this like the 1930s? Is this?
Yes. And so they're like, oh, she's alive. No worries. And so they take her to the Presbyterian hospital, where she has been stuck for like a week. And she is deeply moved by the fact that the Chinese people, who she doesn't even speak Chinese, but the Chinese Adventists come and they pray outside her hospital bed while she's sick. And because of that experience, she realizes, I need to be a better missionary. And these people are kind to me. Yeah. So this is her.
Pardon me, just from my experience with women, like that is the most female response ever. Like, all this stuff happens to me, I need to try harder. Clearly, that's the lesson here. Like,
not that maybe my husband shouldn't have left me.
Yes, right.
And, yes. So she really does try harder. So she decides, oh yeah, my husband was supposed to sell all these books because this is the colporteuring heyday, right? And ingathering heyday. And my husband
paid in books.
Yeah, my husband was supposed to raise money for all these projects, and he's not doing it. So I will go and do it myself. And then she feels bad about asking Chinese people as a foreigner for money. So she says, I will not ask Chinese for money. I will ask only foreigners for money. So she goes around to American and German and French and whatever businesses and knocks on their doors and asks them for money and sells books. So great task. The Chinese women see her doing this and raising money, and they're like, hey, we could help you out. Let's teach us how to do it too. And so they go. So she starts training a little group of women in Manchuria. She's up in the north part of China. And it just kind of spreads. And then accidentally one day she knocks on a door of a business that she thinks was run by a foreigner, and it's really by a Chinese person. And the Chinese person kind of gets ticked off at her when she says, I'm not going, I didn't mean to ask you for money. And they're like, well, why not? I can help. So she ends up becoming a great fundraiser and trainer of other women on how to do colporteuring and ingathering, and really starts training a bunch of Bible workers in Manchuria, women Bible workers specifically. Later gets moved. Her husband gets transferred down to Shanghai. She goes down to Shanghai, and she gets really involved in raising funds for hospitals and for the Red Cross. Because she has no kids, she stays during a lot of war-torn periods. We have where Shanghai gets shot up by the Japanese during the Second Sino-Japanese War. And she writes an account of the horror of actually having Adventist, and whole Adventist family gets killed. It's really sad and tragic. And finding the husband and trying to comfort him and stuff like that, because he was the only one that survived of his family. And then when she goes back to the U.S., since she gets evacuated from Shanghai that time, She goes around and asks money does public speaking events, big public speaking events that are advertised in, like, I'm trying to remember. I think it's Los Angeles Times. There's actually an advertisement about how she's going to speak
Oh
about this
yeah.
experience in China.
Yeah.
Um, so she's, yes, quite the fundraiser. Apparently, quite the public speaker, since they're putting her out there to do this. And but she goes back to China. She's like, okay, the Japanese have now taken over Shanghai. It's probably safe to go
Oh.
back. And so she goes back and ends up, they stay there. And then, of course, the Pearl Harbor is about ready to happen. Things are starting to tense up. She knows things are starting to tense up, but she and her husband decide to stay there. They don't have kids, so they send the other missionary women. She's one of the few missionary women that stays. And they send the ones with children out to the Philippines, which is another story and not a good idea in the end.
Yeah.
And she and her husband eventually, there's gradually restrictions that occur after Pearl Harbor, but they eventually get stuck in a concentration camp. Her husband gets super sick. He gets taken off because he's so sick. They think he's going to die, and they stick him in a hospital, and he actually just disappears. She thinks he's dead for like a year or two. And she doesn't find him till after the end of the war. Apparently, some Chinese church members find him in the hospital because you have to provide your own food. Well, he has nobody. His wife's in a concentration camp, so the Chinese Adventists feed him all during the war and take care of him anyways.
I see. Wow.
But she comes back after she goes back to the U.S., recovers from World War II and from all the weight that she lost and the dysentery she had and all of that stuff, comes back to China, serves until they get kicked out again by the communists this time. And then her husband dies of a heart attack in California shortly thereafter. But quite the woman.
No kidding.
And a lot to financially build up and establish the hospitals that we often attribute to people like Harry Miller. In fact, she basically persuades a warlord in the north to donate property and money to build a hospital.
By the way, I don't know if we can do this, but they've recently found the recordings and preserved and digitized them from the 1946 GC session. And there's a short little clip of Olga O telling their story, just an absolute firecracker.
Yeah.
So I don't know. If there's a way that we can share that, but it's amazing.
All right. Well, let's share it.
We've asked Sister John Ost to give us briefly the experiences in the internment camp in Shanghai.
The Japanese placed 18 barbed wires around the fence, around the campus. They tried to exclude all outside contact with the world. They succeeded very well in doing this, but still they gave us 7 feet by 9 feet in which to live for each couple. And in these 7 by 9 feet, we found a wonderful place in which to commune with God.
That's a fascinating story, though.
Yes, and I think it actually shows a lot of the people that are actually building up the church. Like Olga and all the Bible women that she worked with were clearly doing a lot to actually convert, evangelize, build the hospitals, build the educational institutions. She's actually such a good fundraiser that they request her to go to the Philippines to train people when they're starting to build Manila Hospital, what is still a Manila Hospital actually today. They have her go over and train people to raise funds to build that hospital. Anyways, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So after telling me all of that, my first thought is, let's not tell her story. Let's tell her husband's story. That's the exciting one. There's nothing exciting in what she did. I mean, come on.
John did a lot of stuff too,
Sure.
But it's telling half the story when we miss her
exactly.
story.
Yeah, well said. Have you learned anything in studying these stories of Adventist women that has surprised you?
Wow. Well, I didn't realize back to the single women, I didn't realize how many single women we had that were going as missionaries. We often talk about married couples or husbands, right, but we don't really talk about these single women. And there were a lot of them. And in fact, sometimes as many as a third or more of the missionaries in China specifically were single women.
So I want to pause for a second because, like Boston University, I think there's some research on this that of the different groups, like, there were single men, single women, married couples, whatever. The single women is the single largest group of all those different groupings, I believe. Isn't that right?
No, though the argument is that there were more women as missionaries than men.
Overall,
yes, because they would send single women out, but they would rarely send single men out. And that's true across denominations, not just Adventist. So oftentimes they would encourage men, if they wanted to go as missionaries, to get married really quick before they went.
Really quick indeed. It's like find your girlfriend in college and, well, I was going to say put a ring on it. Don't put a ring on it. Just get married.
Watch.
Put a watch on it.
There were some women that decided that really wanted to go as missionaries and were willing to marry whoever it was that they needed to marry so they could go as missionaries, which is a weird way of picking a spouse. I don't think it's recommended, but
is it weirder than going to a cemetery on your honeymoon?
Well,
I don't know what you're talking about, Matthew.
Oh, the stories we have yet to tell in Adventist history.
Well, the cemeteries are at least just, like a temporary thing.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, definitely.
It's a great contemplation. It's quiet. It's peaceful. It's restful.
Totally normal.
We
all do it. Could have gone to Dubai, Hawaii. Anyways,
we really search hard for that Joseph Wolf site, though.
Anybody that's listening, okay, I'll never live this down, but we did visit the Joseph Wolf's house and church, and of course the cemetery.
Yes.
And we did stay in the Albury Park estate in the retirement home. So my confession is fully out there. These are the confessions of an Adventist historian.
Yes, and the people in the little town were so lovely as we were looking, and they also thought we were completely insane.
Yes. They were like, "Are you sure you want to go here on your honeymoon?"
Oh my goodness. That is how every horror movie starts, guys. But hey, I'm glad you're alive. It obviously worked out just fine. You guys are both doing Adventist history at a high level, and I'm really looking forward to your podcast, Heidi. It's coming out soon, I hope.
Right.
Yes, the first episode, I believe, will drop on March 15. That is the plan,
the Ides of March. Are we to beware them?
Hopefully not. No.
Women's History Month.
Woo! That's right.
And also a Friday, which makes it a great day to drop to start the podcast, because then people can listen to it over the weekend.
Yes.
When they're out, I don't know, mowing their lawn.
Yes.
So where do they find this Adventist, his new podcast they also serve? Where do they find it, Heidi?
So they find it on Spotify or on the Apple Podcast app or wherever you find podcasts.
And we can drop a link in the show notes, right, Matthew?
Well, yeah, when it comes out, we can drop a link in here, and of course, on our Adventist History Project social media, we'll be sharing the link too when it comes out. But March 15th, the first episode of They Also Served will be dropping. I hope you are as excited as we are, because you guys are about to start hearing the other half of Adventist history. So I can't wait. How many episodes are there going to be, Heidi? Are we going on like 10 seasons or what?
Well, I understand you have 2 seasons only, but you have a lot of episodes in your 2 seasons. Pack it in. No, we're just starting out with 1 season of 12 episodes. So
all right.
12 episodes, right? It's very appropriate.
Yeah. You also are putting a lot of work into it, unlike me, because you're interviewing people and like putting their answers into the episode, giving it the full NPR treatment here.
We are. So we'll see how it goes. No, but your episodes, I still love your episode on World War II, where you talk about the woman right before World War II, the German woman who went around.
Oh, Olga O.
Yes, that is a trip of a story. It is.
And of course, Michael and we went and go find that Denver Post article when we were in Denver.
I did, actually, in the archives in Denver. I mean, what do you do for fun in Denver? Some people go skiing. Matthew and I, we go diving in.
So who am I to judge?
I don't know. Hey, Laura, if you're listening, I can't wait to hear where you guys go on your next anniversary.
Oh, Laura,
Oh
if
man,
you're listening, I just want you to. We can go to anywhere you want to go.
Well, cemeteries can be very interesting
Oh,
places to
definitely.
go. Um, and I actually, on my own, when I went on a research trip to England, went to some churches because I was looking for the monuments of to women and men, anyways, in the late medieval, early modern period of how they were portraying their dead relatives, which is also very fascinating. So, unfortunately, I guess we probably will still go to cemeteries.
No, it's a perfectly acceptable place to do research on history. I think it's just the honeymoon part that I'm a little hung up on. But
Yeah.
but hey, it's like a working vacation here. We're doing research on the go. But yeah, no, cemeteries are really fascinating places to go to figure things out. And I am going to be looking forward to the Ides of March. Caesar is gone, but They Also Served is here.
Yes.
And
so do listen, and yes, They Also Serve comes from the title, so it does, from Ava Covington's title. So it doesn't mean that women. I should probably put We Also Serve because I'm a woman, but yes, I should change the title, but
or She Also Served or something. I don't know. I like it.
My impression is that Ava Covington meant it kind of sincerely, whereas I feel like there's a little bit of like tongue in cheek, like, hey, they 60% of the church, they were also there, kind of like, duh.
Yeah, it's just pointing out to also that the stories aren't being told. The obvious lack, and when you really think about it, women often are the educators, especially today. Still, even women are often the educators. And when do people make a lot of their formation of their character, their personality, their theological views? It's in their childhood, not in their adulthood as much.
True.
So when we don't tell their stories and we don't think about their theology and what they're thinking as they're ministering or teaching children, we kind of miss out on who we are and what we become.
I don't want to give away your first episode or whatever, but not only that, but Matthew used the word other. There's this othering kind of thing, right? And not only do we not tell the other, an incomplete history, right? I mean, the majority has been women. It's an incomplete history, but it also, the way we tell those stories sends a message to the new generation and young women, and what that message is that we want to share with them. Are they valued? Are they a part of that story or not?
Yes, absolutely. And that's I can understand that goal here. Is like I have 2 daughters, and I hope they listen to your podcast someday and realize there are people like me who made a difference in Adventist history, and I can make a difference too. And if that's what comes out of this, at least as far as my girls are concerned, I will be over the moon. And I'm sure there's many more young women out there, girls who are out there who are going to hear this, and hopefully see themselves in some of these stories and realize what's possible for them.
Yeah, it'll be a win if your daughters are inspired by it.
Well, they'll definitely be listening. And to quote another eminent Adventist historian, Kevin Burton, I love women.
If you don't know the story behind that, you got to listen to one of our previous episodes of the Seventh Baptists. And I'm so glad. I'm so glad that we have you on record for that, Matthew.
Oh, that quote will never go away.
Kevin Burton is in our episode too, and he has some great stories. So
he does. Oh man. Well, it's been a fun time just talking with you, Heidi. I'm so excited and thrilled. I know you've been working really hard on this. I mean, you've put dozens, probably hundreds of hours, along with a whole team that have been working with you on this. So this is a great new resource. So They Also Served. You've been listening to the Adventist Pilgrimage Podcast as we've been interviewing Heidi Olson Campbell. And watch for this episode to drop March 15, wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening and joining us, and join us every month as we delve deeper into our Adventist past.